Yo, what up, everybody? My name is Drake Demore from the Win City Sports Podcast, and this episode of Cedric Ben's Combat Quarter is brought to you by the Win City Sports Podcast. Check us out on Spotify, iTunes, and anywhere podcasts are found, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or directly on wincitysports.com. Smell you later.
What up, what up, what up? Welcome back to Cedric's Combat Corner number 28. I am your host, Cedric Ben. Today on the Triple C's podcast, we'll be going over the 154-pound title match that happened last Saturday between Julian JRock Williams and Hassan Banana Rosario. Yes, that's his nickname, Banana. I'm sure there's a story behind it, but I didn't get a chance to find out why. But I'm sure there's a reason why. Anyways, we'll be going over that championship bout. I'm going to start off with a brief summary of the action. Then I'll give a breakdown analysis of each boxer. And then we'll go through the boxing training focus of the week, which will be sitting down on your punches and establishing more of a jab to control more of the fight. Yeah. All right, so let's start with the challenger first. Going into the fight, the challenger. They said Jason, but it's spelled Jeison, and he's from the Dominican Republic. So I'm pretty sure it's pronounced Hassan. Hassan, but we'll call him Jason just to make things easier. Jason Banana Rosario comes in with a record of 20, now he's 21-1, 20 wins, 1 loss, and 1 draw with 14 KOs. That 1 loss came from Nathaniel Gallimore, who was a good fighter. He just lost a close one to Erickson Lubin a couple of weeks ago, did Nathaniel. So yeah, he's a good fighter, and that was Hassan's only loss of his career so far with 14 KOs. Couldn't find anything on his amateur career. But yeah, so he came into this fight. Now this was the big thing. The odds were 30-1. Which is crazy. They basically didn't give this guy a chance to win. But the thing, especially after seeing the fight and doing a little bit of research on Rosario's background, those odds were 30-1, not because he's not good, but because nobody has really heard of him before. That's why. Because it's not because he's not good, especially after what he did on Saturday to beat the champion. He definitely shouldn't have been a 30-1 underdog. I'm pretty sure there's a rematch clause, so I'm very curious to see what the line's going to be on that one. Because I've said this before, in the past year, there's probably been like 2 or 3 fights where I found out afterwards what the odds were. I don't really gamble that much, but once in a while I do. But I found out afterwards what the odds were, and if I would have knew before, I would have put some money down, like Joshua and Ruiz. Again, I never predicted Ruiz to win, but I definitely didn't think those odds should have been that far apart the first fight. And even JRock Williams and Jarrett Hurd, same thing. Those odds were way too high for Hurd as the favorite. Now, for the former champion, Julian Williams, he came into this, his record currently stands at 27 with 2 losses. Those 2 losses coming from good fighters in one of the Charlo brothers and this last one against Rosario. Julian Williams comes in with 16 knockouts on his 27 wins. Very good boxer. But he just didn't have it Saturday night. And I'll give the breakdown right now. First, I gotta say, I appreciate how PBC, the Premier Boxing Champions, I'm pretty sure Top Rank and DAZN and Showtime do the same thing too. About 2 weeks before a major fight happens, on YouTube they'll put like a 10-15 minute little documentary on each fighter. Like they'll talk about each fighter within that 15 minutes, just to give you their background on where they're coming from and what's going on in their life leading up to the fight, which is very good to know. And this is one of the reasons why I don't really gamble that much, because if I don't know their background, like I watch the fights obviously, but you don't know if these guys are training hard or not, and that's the difference. The most recent example a couple weeks ago, Andy Ruiz had the opportunity of a lifetime had the biggest upset in the past decade, a couple of months ago. In the rematch, he had the opportunity of a lifetime to make financially life, changing type of money, but, establish himself as one of the top boxers in the most popular division in the sport. And he simply did not train. Anyways, that's another story to get into. My whole point of saying that is that I watched the mini documentary on this fight for JRock and Rosario, and this guy Rosario comes from a disciplined camp. So he comes from a camp. He's originally from the Dominican Republic, but when he comes to camp, they have a spot in Florida where they go for 3 months. Now here's the thing: none of the fighters are allowed to leave without a coach's supervising them, like wherever they're going. A certain time they have to get to bed. Certain time they have to wake up. They have a chef for the house, so there's no excuses. There's no excuses for missing weight. Like, these guys are seriously disciplined, and if you break any of those rules, you're out. Simple as that. So that's some discipline right there. So just knowing that gave me a little bit of confidence, even though I never seen or heard Rosario before. That right there gave me some confidence that he would at least put up a competitive match. So just to give you the end result was a 5th round stoppage for Rosario, who pulled off the upset. And he did it with no specific game plan. His strategy was mainly just heart and determination. Keep your hands up, come forward. Whatever is open, throw it. And when I say, let me clarify that. When I say no specific game plan, I do not mean that in a disrespectful way. Especially because he won, so you can't say that in a disrespectful way if the guy did what he did and he won. But what I mean is, sometimes people have specific, like, you can tell there's a specific strategy that a boxer's trying to do. Again, most recent example, the rematch between Andy Ruiz and Anthony Joshua. Anthony Joshua was clearly trying to be a boxer, staying on his toes, staying on the outside, keeping Andy Ruiz at the end of his long punches. And that was the game plan. He was not trying to stand there and go toe-to-toe with the guy that just knocked him out a couple of months earlier. And so that was clearly his strategy, to box and use his lateral movement to stay away from Andy Ruiz. Yeah, the second fight was a much different game plan than the first one. Now, here is something that you got to be careful for. And this ties into what I usually talk about: knowing your opponent, knowing their tendencies, understanding the things that they like to do, and seeing the things that they don't really feel comfortable doing. Now, one of the characteristics of a dangerous opponent is someone who is willing to take more risks than you are. Those crazy type of fighters that don't mind taking 2 punches just to give you one of their bombs. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In this case here, Jason Rosario, or Jason, I should say, I shouldn't say he wasn't just taking the punches. He was actually making an effort to try to slip and duck under and step back and block. He was doing all those things. And here's the other part to that. This might be something that you would only understand if you actually fought or just sparred before. If you ever, if someone's throwing at you, but you're at least making the effort, the movement of slipping, ducking under, stepping back, or blocking, just making those movements, the punch should not hit you square on. It should graze off of you. And that is a major difference in the effectiveness of the punch. The major difference being, if you take it square on, you're probably going to get dropped. But if you're moving with it, slipping with it, trying to duck under, and it still hits you, but it kind of glides off, those ones you can still take and counterpunch. And that's exactly what Jason Rosario was doing. He wasn't just blatantly taking a punch. He was trying to slip a duck under. He was just great. He was getting grazed and just coming back with 1 or 2 bombs. And he did it very effectively. Yeah, because JRock Julian Williams, he was throwing very good. He was boxing very good. Like everything he was doing was good, just not enough of it. And for the exact reason why I just explained with Rosario. The one thing that I believe would have been a major difference for JRock Williams was to simply throw more jabs. Because he does have an educated jab, like he was throwing it properly. Like sometimes he would throw it hard, sometimes he would just throw it for speed. Sometimes and then after he established those two, then he would throw some fakes in there. And sometimes he would double it up, and those were all effective. They were all effective in making Rosario hesitate to come forward for that split second. He just wasn't doing enough of it, especially against an opponent that's determined to come forward after you. You know, you hear all the time when people say the jab is the most important punch in boxing, and it's extremely important. It is also important, don't forget, to make sure you perfect all the other punches too. Because if you don't have everything else, at some point in time, you will need it at the highest level. So, but again, very important that you have an educated jab, not just you know, you have the shoulder, you have the strength and endurance to throw lots of them, properly placed jabs. Because what it does, the whole purpose of that educated jab is to have your opponent hesitate to come forward. It's not a knockout. Well, actually, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's not a knockout punch, because you can still, I've seen people get dropped by walking into a stiff jab. So don't get it wrong. You can still get dropped from a jab, but most likely it's not, you know, most likely you don't see that too often. But what it does do again, especially against someone that's really being aggressive and really wants to come after you, is it'll make them reset. Like they're coming after you, you know, they're throwing their punches, but if you just make their head snap back for that split second, they have to stop and reset what they want to do. They can't, no one's just gonna, unless you throw it really, really soft. Like you don't even step with your front foot and just extend your arm out there. Of course, someone's just gonna walk through that. All right, so establish a good jab. That will make your opponent hesitate, and that just sets up everything else. Once you have your opponent hesitating, then that just opens up everything else. Then you're in control. Then you're the boss. Once you have them hesitating, then you can get some fakes in there. Once you get their fakes in there, then you basically are in total control of what they're doing. But again, it doesn't, and it's hard to get that. You know, people just think a little jab throwing arm out there doesn't make a difference, but it does if you know how to use it properly. That, and also I think JRock needed to sit down on his punches just a little bit more. Because again, he was the punches that he was landing were good. He landed some straight crosses to the face, some slick footwork to step to the side and land punches to the head and to the body. Like he was doing all the right things. It's not like he wasn't, you know, it's not like he was technically unfundamental and doing crazy stuff. Just not enough of it. And Rosario is the new champion. So he has 3 belts now. The most important one, the WBC, but he also has the IBF and the IBO. So what is next for both these guys? Rosario, with his whole world open up now. Those paychecks are going to get bigger. That's the number one thing. The paychecks are going to get bigger. And now, his options are open. Who knows? If he would have lost this match, nobody would even said nothing. Nobody would even talked about him for another long time. But now his name, he's forced his way into the mix of the top guys. Now, as for Mr. Williams, I don't think he was looking too far ahead himself, even though everyone in the media was talking about was looking ahead to the rematch with Charlo. And it seems like Jarrett Hurd did not want the rematch at this time for some reason, but I'm sure he's going to want it in the future. Everyone wants to get back their loss. But yeah, everyone was talking about the rematch with Charlo, and that, you know, because JRock was on like a 5-fight winning streak going into this fight. He won 5 fights in a row. A couple of them were like serious good stoppages or knockouts, and that's why everyone was talking about it. But I'm not blaming him, because I did, in that same documentary that I was listening to, he did say that he doesn't want to let the moment get to him. And this was a hometown fight for him too. Oh man, I always feel bad when guys get beat up in their own hometown, in front of all their family and friends. So yeah, I don't. He said himself he wasn't distracted. He didn't want to celebrate too much, and that he was determined. And he said he wasn't looking far ahead past his opponent. So yeah, so all the credit to Rosario, because Jared Hurd didn't have any excuses. He had, he was prepared, he was focused, and Rosario was just the better man that night, and that was it. All right, now for the boxing training focus of the week. Two things: sitting down on your punches, something you could practice on bag or on pads too. But I'm sure your coach doesn't want you banging on his shoulders practicing power. Well, I don't. My pads are more for technique. But anyway, on the bag, sitting down. When I say sit down, I just mean use your legs more to punch harder, not just simply flexing your arms and swinging your upper body. Bend your legs, do a little bit of a squat. And I always remind people, if you're throwing a fast combination, you can't pivot on each punch. But if you're just throwing single punches, like just one single punch, you want to make sure you pivot. You want to make sure that you pivot. So sit down and just tell yourself that in your head. Repeat that. Sit down, sit down. That will automatically make your punches harder without doing anything different with your upper body. Just bending your legs more and make sure you pivot on the single punches. That'll make everything harder. And then the next one, oh yeah, there's three of them. I forgot. Different angles. Punching from when you're moving, if someone's coming after you, whatever punches you throw, move. Don't just back up in a straight line. You hear me say sometimes there's something called the 2-second rule. You never want to stand in front of your opponent for more than 2 seconds. Obviously, you're not going to stand there and count 1, 2. So the easiest way to remember is just whatever hand you finish with, move to that side in your boxing stance without crossing your feet. Finish with your left, move over to your left. Finish with your right, step to your right without crossing your feet. Because you can't punch or defend yourself if your feet are crossed right in front of the person. And then the last one, most important one, ways to establish your jab better during competition. 3 ways. So obviously in shadow boxing, just throwing it, you don't want to hyperextend your elbow by throwing, completely straightening your arm, but you want to, use your legs more, push off that back leg, step with that front foot. Don't put all your weight onto your front leg. Still keep the weight in the center, but you're still pushing off that back leg. Ways to practice on the bag, whether you're fighting 2 minutes or 3 minutes, you should be throwing a couple of rounds of just jabs. And again, mixing up the tempo, the educated jab, sometimes hard, sometimes fast, sometimes bring it high-low. And then the third way to establish a better jab for your competition is in sparring. Sometimes I'll have my boxers do something that we call technical sparring. Specifically, we'll call it jab wars, where it's only jabs, like one guy, well, depending on the skill level, 2 guys there, and they're only throwing jabs. And of course, the defense for it too, not just all throwing. Practice catching and slipping of the jab. So yeah, there you have it. Sit down on those punches. And this is specifically if you're getting ready to fight someone that is very aggressive. Those 3 things. Sit down on those punches so that they respect your power. Because if your opponent doesn't respect your power, they're just going to walk through whatever you're throwing. So it doesn't have to be knockout. You don't have to try to knock them out, but you have to let them know. You have to make sure that they respect your power. Second one is moving off different angles. Whatever hand you finish with, step to that side. And the third one, that jab will make your fighting life easier if you have a good, educated jab. All right, there you have it. Thank you very much for listening to Cedric's Combat Corner number 28. I got to give a big thank you to Win City Sports for getting Cedric Combat Sports on Spotify, iTunes, and Apple Podcasts. So if you don't have time to sit down and listen to the YouTube show, check me out on Spotify, iTunes, and Apple Podcasts. Yeah, I'll catch you guys soon. Shout out to Win City Sports. Make sure you guys hit me up if any questions or concerns, anything you want me to add to the show. All right, I'm out. Peace.